Welcome. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to remember. You don't even need to listen closely. These words are simply here, like background light, allowing the mind to soften and the body to rest. Understanding does not require effort. In fact, it often arrives when effort fades. You may notice that as the body relaxes, the mind begins to loosen its grip. Thoughts slow down. Space opens naturally. This is not something you create. It is something you allow. Before we begin, allow yourself to settle in and get comfortable. There is nothing you need to focus on or remember, and it's perfectly okay if you drift in and out of sleep as you listen. Let the words move through you naturally, knowing that anything meant to be received will be. This is simply a quiet space to relax, soften, and be present in whatever way feels right to you.
The meaning of I am, a quiet reflection. The words I am are among the simplest phrases we know, and yet they point to something vast, subtle, and deeply intimate. Long before they are attached to any description, belief, or identity, I am expresses the fact of existence itself. It is the recognition of being, prior to any story about who that being is supposed to be. When spoken softly, without adding anything to it, I am becomes less of a statement and more of a noticing. Awareness noticing itself. Many spiritual and philosophical traditions return to this phrase again and again, not because it defines something, but because it removes definitions. Before name, history, role, or memory, there is simply the sense of being present. You do not have to try to access this. You do not have to believe in it. The fact that you are aware right now is already the experience of I am. In teachings often attributed to Bashar, the idea of I am is described as the core frequency of existence. It is not personality, preference, or emotion, but the neutral point from which all experience arises. From this perspective, identity is something layered on top of being, not the source of it. The self that says I am tired, I am searching, or I am becoming is already standing on the foundation of a deeper I am that needs no qualifier. This idea echoes through the Kabbalion, particularly in its emphasis on mentalism, the principle that all experience arises within consciousness. If all is mind, then I am is the recognition of that mind becoming aware of itself at a particular point of focus. The universal does not remain distant or abstract. It localizes itself as perception, as presence, as this moment of awareness reading or listening right now. As above, so below. The infinite reflected in the immediate. From this view, I am is not an affirmation meant to create something new. It is a reminder of what is already true beneath all movement and change. When awareness forgets itself, it identifies exclusively with form, with thought, with circumstance. When awareness remembers itself, it rests in being, allowing form to arise and dissolve without resistance. This remembering is not dramatic. It is quiet. Often almost ordinary. Abraham teachings often speak of alignment, of returning to a natural state of well-being by releasing resistance. I am, in this sense, is the state of zero resistance. It is awareness before judgment. Being before effort. When you rest in I am, you are no longer trying to become aligned. You are noticing that alignment is already present beneath the noise of thought. This is why the phrase I am has been treated with reverence across cultures. It is not because the words themselves are powerful, but because of what they point toward. When stripped of description, I am does not reinforce the ego. It softens it. The ego depends on contrast, comparison, and story. I am without additions dissolves those structures temporarily, allowing awareness to rest in itself. The mind often wants to turn I am into something to understand, analyze, or use. But its power lies in not doing. When you say I am silently, without finishing the sentence, the mind pauses. It waits. In that pause, presence becomes more noticeable. Thought slows. The nervous system relaxes. There is nothing to defend and nothing to prove. In the framework of all is one. I am is the same awareness looking out from countless perspectives. This does not mean individuality disappears. It means individuality is understood as expression rather than separation. Each person is a unique lens through which the same field of awareness experiences itself. When you say I am, you are not claiming ownership of existence. You are acknowledging participation in it. As above, so below becomes less abstract here. The same awareness that animates stars animates breath. The same intelligence that organizes galaxies organizes perception. Not as hierarchy, but as continuity. The universal does not overshadow the personal. It expresses itself through it. I am is the bridge between the infinite and the intimate. Many misunderstand this concept and fear that recognizing I am will erase meaning, emotion, or connection. In truth, it often does the opposite. When identity is no longer tightly bound to fear-based narratives, experience becomes lighter. Emotions pass more freely. Compassion arises naturally. Presence deepens, not because it is forced, but because resistance has softened. I am is also deeply stabilizing. In moments of confusion or overwhelm, returning to the simple fact of being can ground the nervous system. You may not know what comes next. You may not understand what is unfolding. But you can notice that awareness is here. Breathing is happening. Being is intact. Nothing essential is missing. This is why I am is often described as eternal or timeless. Not because it exists forever in a linear sense, but because it is always now. Past and future appear within it. Thought moves through it. Sensation arises within it. But I am itself does not move. It remains the still point through which movement is known. When teachings speak of creation beginning with I am, they are not describing an event in time. They are describing a condition. Awareness knowing itself is the beginning of experience in every moment. From that knowing, perception unfolds. Choice appears. Expression happens. Reality is not created once. It is created continuously, now, through awareness. This understanding removes urgency from spiritual growth. There is nothing to reach and nowhere to arrive. Expansion happens naturally as resistance dissolves. Awakening is not something added to I am. It is the recognition that nothing was ever missing from it. Resting in I am does not require isolation or withdrawal from life. It can be present while walking, listening, breathing, or falling asleep. It does not demand focus. It allows softness. Even drifting in and out of attention is part of it. Awareness remains whether the mind is active or quiet. In this way, I am becomes a refuge that does not exclude the world. It includes it. Everything belongs within awareness. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Even fear, when noticed within I am, loses its grip, because it is no longer mistaken for the whole of identity. What remains is simplicity, presence, a gentle knowing of being. No labels required. You do not need to hold this understanding. You do not need to remember it perfectly. Even forgetting happens within I am. Awareness does not leave. It does not fail. It simply is. And in recognizing that, even briefly, something softens. Effort loosens. Breath deepens. The mind rests. There is nothing more to do. I am is already here. I am and the all is one, a deeper unfolding. Once the sense of I am is recognized as simple awareness, something subtle begins to shift. Identity loosens, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer mistaken for the source. Awareness is no longer experienced as something personal that belongs to a body or a mind. It begins to feel more like a field, open and inclusive, within which experience arises. This is where the understanding of the all is one naturally emerges, not as a belief, but as a recognition. The all is one does not mean that everything looks the same or behaves the same. It means that everything arises from the same underlying awareness. The many expressions of life are movements within a single field of being. Just as countless waves appear on the surface of one ocean, individual experiences arise within one awareness. Each wave has its own shape and duration, yet none are separate from the water itself. From this perspective, I am is not isolated. It is not a fragment cut off from the whole. It is the whole, experienced from a specific point of view. Awareness does not divide itself when it expresses as form. It localizes perception while remaining unified in essence. The sense of being that you recognize as I am is the same sense of being appearing everywhere, filtered through different conditions, histories, and bodies. This understanding is reflected in many teachings, including those that speak of universal consciousness expressing itself through individual focus points. Bashar often describes reality as a single consciousness exploring itself through infinite perspectives. Each perspective feels separate, yet all are occurring within the same larger awareness. Individual identity is not an illusion to be destroyed, but a lens through which the one experiences variety. The Kabbalion echoes this through the principle of correspondence. What exists at the universal level is reflected at the individual level. The structure of reality repeats itself across scales, not because it is duplicated, but because it is the same intelligence expressing itself in different ways. The all is not somewhere else. It is here, appearing as this moment, this perception, this awareness noticing itself. When I am is understood in this way, it is no longer personal or private. It becomes a shared ground of being. This does not collapse boundaries in a harmful way. Instead, it creates coherence. Differences remain, but they are no longer experienced as absolute separation. Relationship replaces isolation. Participation replaces opposition. This is why the realization of oneness often softens fear. Fear depends on the belief in absolute separation, on the idea that awareness is fragile and confined. When awareness is recognized as part of a greater whole, experience feels held rather than threatened. Even uncertainty becomes easier to rest within, because awareness itself is not at risk. Importantly, oneness does not remove choice or individuality. It reframes them. Choice becomes the way the one expresses itself through the many. Individual action becomes the movement of the whole exploring itself through form. From this view, responsibility is not imposed from outside. It arises naturally from understanding connection. Abraham teachings often emphasize that alignment occurs when resistance drops and awareness returns to its natural state. When identity rests in I am and recognizes itself as part of the whole, resistance softens. There is less effort to control outcomes, because experience is no longer felt as something happening against you. It is happening through you, as part of a larger unfolding. This shift has subtle effects. Judgment relaxes. Comparison loses its grip. The need to define oneself against others fades. Not because difference disappears, but because difference is no longer threatening. Each expression is understood as valid within the whole, serving its own role in the larger pattern. The all is one also reframes how experience is interpreted. Events are no longer seen as isolated accidents, but as relational movements within a living system. Meaning is not imposed. It emerges naturally from attention and presence. Life begins to feel less mechanical and more conversational, as if awareness is responding to itself. This does not mean that everything feels pleasant or easy. Oneness does not eliminate contrast. It contextualizes it. Contrast becomes a tool for experience rather than a problem to eliminate. Pain, confusion, and challenge are understood as movements within awareness, not evidence of failure or separation. As this understanding settles, the sense of I am expands without effort. It becomes less centered on a single narrative and more open to the flow of experience. Awareness no longer contracts around identity as tightly. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. Experience moves freely, without needing to be owned or resisted. The all is one is not something to remember constantly. It does not require mental reinforcement. It reveals itself naturally in stillness, in quiet attention, in moments where resistance is absent. Often it feels less like realization and more like relief, as if something heavy has been set down. This understanding also brings humility. If all awareness is shared, then no single perspective holds the whole truth. Each viewpoint contributes something unique, but none stand above the rest. Wisdom becomes relational rather than authoritative. Listening becomes as important as speaking. In this way, I am and the all is one are not separate concepts. They are the same recognition, seen from different distances. I am is the intimate recognition of being. The all is one is the expansive recognition that this being is shared. One moves inward. The other moves outward. Both arrive at the same place. Nothing needs to be forced from this understanding. It does not demand agreement or belief. It simply invites openness. Awareness recognizes itself, and in doing so, recognizes everything else as part of itself. There is no boundary where being ends and the world begins. There is only experience arising within awareness, moment by moment, as a single, living whole. And within that whole, awareness continues to say, quietly and without effort, I am. Where it all meets, a quiet integration. When these ideas are seen together, something subtle shifts. I am is no longer a concept to think about, and oneness is no longer something to understand. They begin to feel like the same recognition, approached from different directions. Awareness notices itself, and in doing so, recognizes everything else as part of that same field of being. The sense of separation that once felt solid begins to soften, not because it is challenged, but because it is no longer needed. Experience continues to unfold, but it is held differently. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations arise within awareness rather than defining it. The personal and the universal are no longer in conflict. They are expressions of the same movement, seen from different distances. I am becomes the quiet center that does not resist change. The all is one becomes the spacious context that includes it. As above, so below becomes the way coherence is maintained across experience. Nothing is added. Nothing is removed. Awareness simply recognizes its own pattern. This recognition does not require effort. It does not ask for belief or certainty. It does not demand attention. Even drifting awareness is part of it. The understanding works whether it is being thought about or not, because it is not an idea. It is the structure of experience itself. When attention relaxes into this, life feels less like something happening to you and more like something happening through you. Not in a dramatic way, but in a grounded, intimate way. Choice becomes clearer. Reaction softens. Experience feels less fragmented. The need to define who you are fades, because being is already established. The need to search for meaning eases, because meaning is present in awareness itself. The need to separate inner and outer dissolves, because both are recognized as movements within the same field. Nothing needs to be resolved here. There is no final understanding to reach. The simplicity of being is enough. Awareness continues to experience itself as form, as movement, as moment, without losing its wholeness. This is where all the ideas rest. Not as conclusions, but as context. Awareness remains aware. I am. And everything else unfolds within that quiet knowing. Why this is not just philosophy, awareness in motion. At a certain point, it becomes clear that what has been described is not a belief system or an abstract way of thinking about reality. Philosophy lives primarily in the mind. These ideas do not. They live in direct experience. They are felt before they are understood, and often noticed long before they are named. The reason they endure across cultures and traditions is not because they are convincing, but because they are verifiable through awareness itself. I am is not something you accept intellectually. It is something you notice. The same is true of oneness and correspondence. You do not need to adopt a worldview to encounter them. They reveal themselves in moments of stillness, in shifts of perception, in the way experience changes when attention softens. Philosophy explains from the outside. Awareness recognizes from within. This is why these ideas continue to surface in teachings like those attributed to Bashar, Abraham, and the ancient principles of the Kybalion. They are not presented as theories to debate, but as descriptions of how consciousness already functions. They point toward observation rather than belief. Try this, notice that, see what happens. The emphasis is always on experience. When awareness rests in I am, something practical changes. The body relaxes. The nervous system regulates. Thought slows. Reaction becomes less automatic. These are not philosophical outcomes. They are physiological and psychological shifts that can be felt directly. Presence alters the state of the system. This is measurable, even if it is subtle. The understanding that all is one also changes lived experience. Relationship feels different when separation is no longer assumed. Compassion arises more easily, not because it is morally required, but because it feels natural. When awareness recognizes itself in everything, opposition loses its edge. This is not an idea about unity. It is a felt sense of connection that influences how experience unfolds. As above, so below becomes practical when inner shifts produce outer change. Not as magic, but as correspondence. A calmer internal state leads to different choices. Different choices lead to different outcomes. This chain is experiential. It does not require belief in metaphysics. It requires attention to cause and effect within awareness. Abraham teachings often emphasize that alignment is felt as ease, and misalignment is felt as tension. This is not philosophy. It is feedback. The body and emotions respond immediately to shifts in thought and attention. Awareness knows when it is resisting itself. When resistance drops, relief follows. This is lived knowledge, not conceptual agreement. Bashar often frames this in terms of frequency and state of being. When the state changes, experience reflects it. This is observable over time. When fear dominates attention, reality feels constrained. When clarity or curiosity dominates, options expand. The world does not change arbitrarily. Perception does, and experience reorganizes accordingly. What makes these ideas practical is that they are always happening, whether noticed or not. Awareness is always shaping experience. Identity is always influencing perception. Correspondence is always in motion. These teachings simply bring attention to processes that are already active. Nothing new is introduced. What changes is recognition. This is also why these ideas do not demand agreement. They work whether believed in or not. A person does not need to accept oneness for connection to influence their experience. A person does not need to believe in I am for awareness to be present. The principles function regardless of interpretation. Understanding only makes them easier to navigate. Over time, this recognition builds trust. Not in ideas, but in awareness itself. Experience becomes something to listen to rather than control. Signals are noticed earlier. Course corrections happen more gently. Life feels less reactive, not because it is controlled, but because awareness is included. This is where philosophy ends and practice begins. Not in effort, discipline, or repetition, but in attention. Awareness noticing itself. Experience responding. Patterns revealing themselves naturally. Nothing here asks you to adopt a new identity. Nothing asks you to reject what you already know. It only asks for presence. And presence is already here. This is why these ideas endure. They are not explanations imposed on life. They are descriptions of life as it is experienced from within awareness. I am is not a concept. It is the ground of experience. And everything that has been described unfolds within it, moment by moment, quietly and faithfully, whether noticed or not. A quiet way to feel it, not think it. At this point, nothing new needs to be explained. The ideas you've heard are not meant to be carried forward as thoughts. They are meant to fade into the background, leaving only what can be felt. Understanding has already done its work. Now there is space to rest. Rather than thinking about I am, simply notice that awareness is already present. There is no effort required to do this. You don't need to focus or concentrate. The fact that you are aware right now is enough. Awareness does not announce itself. It is quiet, steady, and already here. You may notice sensations in the body, the rhythm of the breath, or the softness of stillness between thoughts. None of these need to be changed. They are simply movements within awareness. There is no correct way for this moment to feel. Whatever is present belongs. If thoughts arise, let them pass without following them. They do not interrupt awareness. They appear within it. Just as sound arises and fades, thought comes and goes on its own. Awareness remains unchanged. There is no need to search for oneness. There is no need to confirm it. The sense of being present is already shared, already whole. Awareness does not feel divided. It does not need to be unified. It simply is. You may notice that the sense of me softens when attention rests this way. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer needs to define itself. Being does not require explanation. Presence does not need permission. As above, so below does not need to be understood here. It is already happening. The same quiet awareness noticing breath is the awareness noticing everything. Nothing needs to be expanded. Nothing needs to be reduced. This moment is complete. If you feel yourself drifting, that is fine. Sleep does not interrupt awareness. Rest does not undo anything. Even unconsciousness unfolds within the same field of being. There is nothing to miss and nothing to hold on to. Let the words become background sound. Let attention soften. Let experience move on its own. Awareness knows how to be present without effort. This is not something to practice. It is something to allow. Awareness is already aware. I am does not need to be said. It is felt. And in that feeling, nothing else is required. You can rest here. Everything continues naturally.